Hello everyone, Percy7 here, welcome back to more Bloons TD Battles 2, and in this video we'll be showcasing Prince of Darkness. It's going to be my first Wizard 5th tier. I'm actually kind of excited to show off. As you know, Archmage and BTD6 I guess is kind of meh for a 5th tier. Wizard Lord Phoenix is a bit too expensive to really fully utilize, and I really don't see a point in just going for it right now. As 54k, it's kind of hard to get without some sort of external income that isn't Bloon Trap. As my only problem with Bloon Trap is that most people just straight up stop sending eco whenever I get Bloon Trap, which is kind of annoying. Now my opponent Monizzle actually has Biker Bones, which is the first time I've seen someone use Biker Bones. Usually I just see people end up using Ocean Oben, regular Oben, or Gwendolyn, or Cyber Quincy, but I don't really see Cyber Quincy as much. Anyways, this is going to be my first match actually using Prince of Darkness, and unfortunately the only match I was actually able to use Prince of Darkness in. I actually just finished recording this session that you're seeing here, and unfortunately even after an hour I really just could not just use Prince of Darkness. Also, something I guess I should mention is that we'll also be seeing some Icicles usage here, as recently I found out that Icicles is actually surprisingly good against Bloon rushes or just mid game rushes in general. It's terrible against Moabs obviously, but against round 12 purples, round 13 region rainbows, it is incredibly good. I really do think it's probably the first ice 4th tier you should go for if you are considering leveling ice. Embrittlement's pretty good, but again it's too slow to be used for D camo. Plus 1 damage to Moab class balloons I guess is alright, but it doesn't really last that long unless you're going to spam them all around the map, which is incredibly inefficient to do. Anyways, before I'm actually able to afford Prince of Darkness, I would just like to talk about it a bit. First thing I noticed is that Prince of Darkness doesn't resurrect BFBs. Not sure if that's intentional, or I guess my zombie count's just not high enough. I can't really see my zombie count, so I'm not really sure if it's at max zombie count or not. It really is really hard to tell if your Prince of Darkness is running out of steam. You just kind of have to hope and pray that, when your opponent sends a rush that it actually has a decent zombie count. Also lag, that's incredibly fun. Anyways, again, like I said, I'm not really sure if not resurrecting BFB is intentional. It probably is intentional, as you'll see, the Moabs that Prince of Darkness revives are incredibly large. And I think a bit too large if you're to ask me, to where it was kind of hard to see my towers late game because the Moabs were just way too big. I mean, NK probably did want the Moabs to be the same size as the Moabs that were sent for consistency's sake, but it was just kind of terrible for me, as because Prince of Darkness is constantly respawning Moabs on the screen. It's very hard to really see what's going on when there's just so many resurrected Moabs on screen. Anyways, let's talk about my opponent's strategy. If you saw that he started with a boomerang and got Biker Bones, and then ended up selling Biker Bones for Glaive Ricochet. He actually ended up having to sell the boomer in order to get a 302 instead of a 320. I'm not really sure if it's worth selling the boomerang just to get a 302, as it's really only for early game. And even then, you could just get multiple ricochets and just end up beating most rushes anyway. Now jumping over to round 10, just because I wanted to show up, I ended up getting Crowd Cannon and getting Icicles. I did see that some guy on Reddit did say that, Crowd Cannon can pop white balloons. I'm not sure if that's true, as looking at the footage here, Crowd Cannon I guess sorta seems like it's popping whites, but I'm not really sure if that's from the engineer or if that's from the Crowd Cannon itself. Unfortunately there is no sandbox mode, so I can't just place down Crowd Cannon and send a bunch of white balloons. That's a feature that's unfortunately missing that really, I guess, should have been the game at launch. Now, if I wanted to, I could have killed him next round by sending just a bunch of regen rainbows, but neither of us are rushing too hard, so I'm assuming, he wanted to go late game, which is perfect for me since I just unlocked Prince of Darkness, so I just decided to start working on my Bloon Trap. After playing quite a few games, I've just come to the conclusion that Bloon Trap isn't really worth getting, before round 10. If you do, you will struggle against camo purples when those come out, as Bloon Trap will easily get overrun by those. That's if you're shimmer or you actually have camo on your Bloon Trap. Also, like I've said before, it does kind of suck that Bloon Trap does rely on your opponent sending eco in order for you to actually get the most use out of it. if your opponent stops sending ecos like he did here, it's basically just useless. I assumed he was saving up here as he wasn't sending any eco. I was like guessing, you know, he's probably gonna end up sending a mob, so I ended up like selling my engineer and getting a 3-2-0, but I guess that wasn't the case because he just sent a few yellows. Here I was just trying to build up my eco for late game. My goal is usually just to end up having around 2,000 eco in order to actually save up for my tier 5s, or the 2 tier 5s that I have right now. You know, I avoid going late game simply because Sentry Champion's like really the only bad DPS I have. I'm not really sure how good Sentry Champion is against bats, but I really don't want to test that out. Seeing as, well, you know, I'm probably going to die to DDT inside, as I can imagine, you know, Sentry Champion might take a little while to actually pop the bad, as if it has the same stats as it does in BTD6, Sentry Champion actually only does 2 layers of damage, which is kind of surprising for a tier 5. Now, just looking at this guy's strategy, I suspected that he didn't, I guess that he didn't. He was like really anticipating me sending a Moab at him, because, you know, he was just kind of mauler and he was spamming, you know, glaive ricochets, and he ended up getting more glaives, but of course I didn't end up sending one because I just really wanted to go late game. I probably could have just killed him by just like selling Bloon Trap and then just spamming fortified Moabs at him, but you know, I wouldn't have really wanted to do that. Now I must say, you know, the Biker Bone skin actually looks kind of cool. I'm actually slightly jealous, as you know, Scientist Gwen is, I guess, a cool looking skin, but I don't really like Scientist Gwen for Blue Fire, and plus Scientist Gwen is kind of annoying to listen to. Please NK let us disable hero audio. I'm really tired of hearing "we have ignition" like every time I place Gwen down. Also, I end up not really using Scientist Gwen because Scientist Gwen's main thing is that, you know, basically the general gist of it is that the abilities either don't last as long or they don't activate as often, but they're a lot stronger. I personally prefer abilities that last longer and are weaker simply because for me, the strategy here struggles against round 5 whites because I have a low level engineer, or I just have like a Gwen at level 2. So if my opponent does start sending like whites at me, I just end up throwing down Cocktail and then getting a wall of fire. Personally, I don't really like doing that simply because I'm wasting money on defense and not spending it on eco, which is really what I want, but you know, I guess it just is a flaw in my strategy and I can't really fault players for exploiting it. Also, I must give Monizzle some credit where it's due. You know, this is a pretty nice tower strategy. It does like really make use out of like top path, primary training, and primary mentoring. I suspected that, you know, primary training and primary mentoring probably won't be too useful in most strategies, because like really you'd want like maybe like a village and then 2 primary towers in order to like make full use out of it. But just thinking, I really couldn't think of like, okay, what 2 primary towers would you want together to like cover each other's weakness? Like, I can't really think of one off the top of my head. Anyways, it's round 22. I'm sitting at a nice 2200 eco. I stopped sending eco as I just need to save up for pod for round 26 and just hope and pray that is strong enough. He does prepare, or my opponent does prepare for round 26 by just getting a bunch of Kylies, or not Kylies, Moab presses, as well as an assassin. At that point I recognized that both of us weren't going to be sending any eco, so I just decided to sell Bloon Trap, as just keeping it around, you know, didn't really make any sense. I was kind of worried as I wasn't really sure if Prince of Darkness was going to be enough to beat DDTs, and like if I do spend like 2400 in order to get Prince of Darkness, I can't like quickly like sell it and then get a Sentry Champion, as of course Sentry Champion does need time in order to actually spawn his sentries. But anyways, on round 24, I've gotten Prince of Darkness. As you can see, I was talking about earlier, you know, the Moabs are just huge. It also doesn't resurrect BFBs. But I kind of feel bad for like Monizzle here, as it doesn't have any 5th tiers, as I can see, you know. By now he probably would have gotten a Moab Dom if he could have afforded it. Although in the previous video, you know, some guy was able to afford Moab Dom without any extra cash generation. I'm actually kind of curious to see like what his eco strat was, as I kind of want, you know, be able to afford like a $60,000 upgrade by like around 26. Now of course, since I wanted to help out Sentry, to help out, you know, Prince of Darkness, just in case it wasn't good enough, I was saving up for a Sentry Champion as well, seeing as, you know, I've heard people say that, you know, 520 with 420 NG spam is pretty good against DDTs. Now I wasn't really sure Prince of Darkness was going to be able to, you know, capture all the DDTs, so I ended up getting a Shimmer. This eventually turns into a Necromancer because, of course, pod buffs, like, pod buffs to other necromancers, although this isn't really a feature that I guess people end up like using or exploiting. Like if Mon Nizzler like really wanted to, I guess pressure me and beat me, he could have sent some fortified ZOMGs at my way. Prince of Darkness of course isn't really, I guess, the best against ZOMGs, or I guess just higher tier blimps in general. It's mainly just, for cleanup. Or I guess that was like the main purpose it was used for in BTD6, as well as countering DDTs, which is why it was the first 5th tier I got. Now surprisingly, I was actually able to afford Sentry Champion before round 26, which is a bit surprising. I could have spammed DDTs at him, but I wanted to see him send DDTs at me first, which he ends up doing. I ended up boosting, but realizing that it actually wasn't necessary. Pod just absolutely decimated those. I was considering getting a snowstorm, but realized, midway through the rush that it just straight up wasn't necessary. Now, of course, Sentry Champion, did help out during that mini rush there, but I wasn't really sure if it was like the main reason why we defended it. I kind of doubt it, as seeing as the previous video, Sentry Champion is okay against DDTs, but I don't really think it killed them that quickly. Here, I start working on my overclock, as of course, Sentry Champion benefits greatly from attack speed buffs. I could have rushed Mon Nizzle again with some more fortified DDTs. I could have just easily just sold Sentry Champion and just spammed them his way. But I really just really wanted to see, the full potential of Prince of Darkness. And as you can see, the mobs end up covering the entire track, which is kind of good and bad at the same time. It's good because of course, full map range is incredibly strong, but it's kind of bad since, you want towers, you want balloons to be popped within Pod's range so you can actually build up a zombie count, but if they're not in his range, he doesn't build up zombie count. Although I must say, overclock doesn't really seem to be as strong as it does in BTD6. Of course, this is obvious, as most towers in this game are a lot weaker than they are in BTD6, but it doesn't seem like, Sentry Champions spawning sentries as fast as I think he would be with, with double attack speed. I set up an Arctic Wind in the back, or not Arctic Wind, a Snowstorm in the back, as I was fairly confident he was definitely gonna go in. He probably, since I easily defeat those DDTs, I assumed he was gonna go in on round 30 and send a fortified bad. I was just hoping that I can send that fortified bad at him first, as I'm terrible against the bad right now. But he ends up sending fortified boosted DDTs at me. I end up boosting here, but Pod just eats those up. Sort of eats those up. And he ends up surrendering before I can even emote, which is actually kind of funny. I do feel bad in this match, as there's no way he was going to be able to win. I was definitely going to win. I was just going to send a fortified bat at him at round 30. There was no way he's going to be able to counter that, so it's a bit sad for him. Is Prince of Darkness good? I'm not really sure. Again, this is the only match I've actually been able to use Pod, unfortunately. So I guess it's kind of just your opinion. But anyways, I'm going to end this video here. And for those wondering why I'm still at 61 trophies, is I've been in and out of Moab Pit for the longest time. Usually it's just I end up losing 2 matches in Moab Pit and winning 1 in Ceramic Crucible. So I've been in and out of Moab Pit for the past few days. It's getting a bit stale, as the reason why I keep losing in Moab Pit is just because Dartling users, it's kind of hard for to compete against Dartling users, as really 230 Hydra Rocket Pods is a bit too strong against, I guess, just Moab class Bloons, as if you haven't heard. Apparently the explosions apply laser shock to Bloons, which again it shouldn't. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing or dropping a like or whatever.